Jonathan Manthorpe, thanks for joining me here. How do you describe what you do now? Because you're a journalist, commentator. What do we call the position that you're in now?
I'm not sure about that. I'm still a daily journalist. Well, not daily journalist. I'm a columnist. I write two international affairs columns a week, one for iPolitics in Ottawa and one for Asia Times out of Bangkok. I also do TV, radio, commentaries and analysis when called upon, and I write books. I guess it's a fairly natural conclusion to my career. It's a sort of senatorial, I guess, and it's fun. I enjoy it. I've been in this business now for nearly 50. I started in 1965.
Whereabouts?
Well, I was at McGill in the early 60s doing political science and economics, and I realized that I was wasting my time. I knew I wanted to be a journalist. My parents emigrated to Canada when I was young. I was 11, and we moved to Toronto. But a cousin of my father's in Britain was the head of the National Union of Journalists there at the time. And so I wrote to him and said, Ken, look, I want to be a journalist. Everything says I'm going to be a journalist. What should I do? And he said, look, you should come and train in Britain. We've just signed a great deal between the union and the publishers, and it's an apprenticeship system in Britain. It's not a university thing. It's an apprenticeship, but although you get a degree at the end of it.
Yeah.
So I went and I joined. I worked on a little weekly paper in the country for 3 years, and you learn a hell of a lot about how societies work when you make your mistakes on the front page of a little weekly paper in a small town.
Because they track you down on the street. Yes.
You learn very, very quickly. And at the end, I took my exam. I was very lucky. I won the national prize as the top graduate in Britain that year, in 1969. Wow. It was luck. But so I came back to Canada in '69 with a nice bit of paper, and walked into the Globe and Mail and saw Clark Davey, who was the managing editor, and said, "Will you give me a try?" And he said, "Okay, I'll give you a week's trial." And I was at the Globe for about 7 years. I started off on night rewrites and night city desk for about a year, and then they posted me to cover Ontario politics at Queen's Park.
Yes.
So I got into political reporting very early on, actually, and I stayed there for about 3 or 4 years, then went to Ottawa, and I was in the press gallery in Ottawa for a couple of years.
For the Globe?
For the Globe, yeah.
Yep.
And then the Toronto Star approached me and offered me what seemed like vast amounts of money at the time to write a daily political column on Ontario politics. I did that for 3 years, and then in 1979 I decided it was time for a change, and the London bureau, the European bureau of the Toronto Star was open. Ernest Hemingway's old job from the 1920s. It was open, and I applied for it and got it. So the family.
So put you back in England.
So the family and I moved back to London. Yeah. Well, Hemingway had the bureau in Paris. This was in London, so I was there for the Star for a couple of years. Then I left, and we won't go into that. Was a sad time, but there we are.
You took a little departure from journalism, did you?
I took a little, yeah. I was freelancing, and then I got a call from Trudeau's office, Pierre Trudeau's office one day, saying, look, we want to patriate the Constitution, which means we need to get a bill through the British Parliament. Right. You speak English on both sides of the Atlantic. You know the Constitution in Canada, because you were reporting on it for the Globe and Mail from Ottawa for years. Would you be part of this little team in London, which was there to advise Trudeau and Trudeau's office on dealing with the British? So I did that for a couple of years, and that was fascinating. I was a little dubious about it because journalists going to the dark side and working for government is always
well, that's the way it's viewed. It's not always that way.
It's not
though.
always that way.
Yeah.
But I thought, well, this is a particular thing. It's got a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Right.
And so I'll do it. And it was fascinating. Quite apart from anything else, it gave me a chance to see whether government actually worked the way I said it had been. I'd been saying it did for years. And
it turned out to be an answer of yes and no.
Yes, exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. And so, but after that, then I went back freelancing, and very soon I was getting more and more requests from Southern News to
Yes.
write for them, and then I became on contract their European correspondent, and then they said, "Look, would you come on staff?" And so I joined Southern News. I came to Ottawa for a couple of years just to get to know everybody. I've never been keen on hiring people off the street and putting them in plum jobs,
Right.
because it never works. It always sets up resentment.
Right.
So they wanted me actually to open the East European Bureau, and I said no. I'll join the staff, but I want to spend time in the office before taking a foreign posting.
Yeah.
Which we did, and then we went to Africa, and which I wanted. I'd spent time in Africa for the Toronto Star, because they didn't tell me actually that they were, so far as this, what does it mean to Metro? There are all these jokes about
Right.
the narrowness of the Toronto Star's vision. But it was only when I got to London that I discovered that so far as the Star was concerned, Africa was part of Europe, and so I spent quite a little bit of time covering the war in Rhodesia. That was my first war.
Wow.
But I loved Africa, and so I really was happy to take the bureau there, and we were there at a fascinating time because it was the end of apartheid in South Africa, and then there was all the stuff in the Horn of Africa, Somalia, Ethiopia, Sudan, Angola.
The change in Rhodesia had already happened, though.
Yeah,
Zimbabwe,
it had
right?
happened,
Yeah.
and actually it was a great time to live there. We had the best of it. Mugabe had not yet gone mad and started grabbing land left, right, and centre.
Yeah.
The place was still working very well indeed. There were some shortages, but nothing you couldn't deal with.
Right.
The family loved it. Our boys went to school there, had great educations there, and it was a great time. It was a wonderful time, and fascinating news period too. And then in '93, I was posted to Hong Kong.
Wow.
And so we got on the plane.
Well,
and
what a
arrived.
fascinating time to be in Hong Kong
Well,
too,
that's
for
right.
in the transition or the lead up.
Covered the whole lead up
Yeah.
to the handover in '97.
Yeah.
And by this time, of course, Conrad Black owned Southern News or Southern Operation.
Yes.
And after the handover, I got the instruction to close the bureau. A lot of the editors, because Conrad's idea, as I understood it, was that he had all these foreign correspondents working for the Daily Telegraph, which he also owned in London, and he didn't see why his Canadian papers really needed foreign correspondents as well.
I'm really sorry to hear that, because you need the Canadian perspective.
Well, this is what a lot of the editors of the Southern papers thought, and so they persuaded me to come and be based in Vancouver, and essentially they gave me a pretty good travel budget and said, look, just do what you've been doing, but it's a longer commute to work.
Right.
So I did that for several years. And then when the Aspers took over, and then CanWest, and then Post Media, the nature of the thing changed again, and then and it became more and more difficult to really sort of fulfill that mandate. And so in the I decided, when there was a buyout in 2013, I decided that it was time to move on. And since then I've been freelancing and writing books and so on and so forth.
It's an extraordinary career to have had the opportunity to be a part of, though, because you get to be a witness to history.
Absolutely.
What if somebody is looking at you saying, well, I want to be you in the future? What are the essential personality traits, because I really think that this is what it starts to come down to. This is not the job that you just go, I'm going to go to school and learn how to follow in your career path. What are the personality traits that you would say, look at?
I sometimes think that perhaps a certain lack of imagination helps.
Almost seems counterintuitive.
That if you thought too much about what you were doing, it would scare you off.
So Greta, who's sitting behind you right now, she was talking about what's it take to be a good writer. You got to just be like, you can't be absorbed in thinking, am I a good writer? You just got to go.
Right. I don't know. I've often had, and this is facile, but when I've given talks to journalism classes in colleges, one of the questions that always comes up is, how do I become a foreign correspondent? Well, it's not that easy anyway these days, because there are very few of them. I was lucky; I got the tail end of when it was possible.
A golden time.
Well, I think the golden time was the generation before me, probably. But I was lucky to catch the end of it.
Yeah.
But I always, when people say, well, how, what do I need to do to become a foreign correspondent? I would say one of the first things you got to do is you should go out and drink a pint of ditch water a day, because your innards are far too clean. You will not survive. You need a much tougher immune system than you get living in Canada or Scandinavia or wherever.
Right.
It can be pretty tough.
You need to re-engineer that microbiome.
Yeah. But if you, but a lot of when people ask how do I become a foreign correspondent, there is a route, and one of the easiest or the most sure routes for young Canadians is, if they've got editing skills, to go and work as an editor for, say, one of the news services, Reuters, Bloomberg, AP, Agence France-Presse. These operations in their foreign offices, they are always looking for editors.
Right.
And you can usually get a job as a copy editor. And once you've got your foot in the door, then you're there when the opportunity comes to do reporting. And once you've got a few paragraphs on your CV saying that you were a editor-reporter for Agence France-Presse in Cambodia or whatever, then you're halfway up the ladder,
right.
And you can go from there, because all the big newspapers, the ones that survive, they like to hire, especially for foreign corresponding, they like to hire people who have got news agency experience, because they know they're dependable. They know that they know how to get around in unfamiliar circumstances, and they know that they will produce on deadline.
And credible work.
And credible work. They know they're good journalists.
Right.
And so that's the easy advice that I give, but that's probably one of the few routes now that is available to people. I mean, you do hear about these sort of citizen journalists who sort of rush off to wars and start,
I don't know. I'm not hearing that anymore.
No, I think
that idea has come and gone.
I think so too, and quite rightly as well, because those people.
Well, it goes back to what you said when you were working in those small northern communities. Yeah. If you don't get it right, people are going to come and ask you to set the record straight.
Absolutely.
And they might do it with an umbrella over your head.
Oh no, this is a difficult profession. It has very understandable but important skills, and this whole business of fake news and the vilification of the media is very, very troubling, because most of the media is pretty skillful, is well versed in the essences of the job, and they know what the profession is and what is necessary to assemble a story and prepare it for printing or broadcasting, whatever. They know what the skills are, and they're good at it. So this vilification is not because the media is bad or unprofessional. It is because the politicians and others don't like the messages.
That's right. They have other agendas.
And so they figure that if they bellow loudly enough that this is not true, that it'll succeed. And I'm afraid, as we see in the States, it is. You know, there's a new culture has emerged in the last 2-3 years that's very troubling.
I agree with you. Thank you very much for sharing this.